Manifesto, alienation, identity conflict, and the machinery of learned helplessness. Condemn the words if they sound bitter. Condemn the anger if it refuses to hide behind polite optimism. It does not matter. History rarely cares about the comfort of those who watch quietly while generations are pushed into confusion and quiet despair. Revolutions were once spoken of as heroic storms that would sweep away injustice. But for many today, the real battlefield is not a jungle or a barricade. It is the interior landscape of alienation. We were prepared for a world that never arrived. Millennials inherited a script written for another era: study hard, obey authority, compete with discipline, and prosperity will follow. Yet the stage changed while we were memorizing the lines. The economy mutated, the social contract collapsed, and opportunity became a rumor whispered in motivational speeches. The result is a generation suspended between expectation and reality, condemned to navigate contradictions that no textbook prepared them for. Alienation is the quiet revolution that no one acknowledges. It is the moment a person realizes that the institutions meant to guide them are themselves confused. Teachers, mentors, commentators each arrives with lectures, advice, and moral certainty. Yet they too are prisoners of cognitive bias, repeating frameworks designed for a world that no longer exists. Guidance becomes noise. Authority becomes performance. This is how identity conflict begins. A young person raised between cultures must translate themselves constantly: language, appearance, ambition, loyalty. The immigrant family imagines opportunity across borders but rarely understands the social ecosystem waiting on the other side. Parents dream of security while children inherit a maze of expectations, stereotypes, and invisible barriers. They are told to integrate, but never fully accepted. They are encouraged to remember their roots, yet punished when those roots appear unfamiliar to the dominant culture. Meanwhile, another tragedy unfolds quietly: the erasure of knowledge. Entire intellectual traditions, Afrocentric philosophy, indigenous history, community-centered ways of thinking remain marginalized because they are not profitable within the academic marketplace. Universities preach diversity while quietly selecting which forms of knowledge deserve institutional legitimacy. Wisdom that does not generate economic return is discarded like an obsolete machine. The consequence is learned helplessness. People begin to believe that the system is immovable. They stop questioning its contradictions because questioning requires energy that poverty, discrimination, and exhaustion steadily drain. Instead, they adapt. They lower expectations. They accept the narrative that success belongs only to those who fit a narrow mold of appearance, wealth, or social approval. But even this adaptation carries humiliation. A person is measured constantly: height, skin color, accent, educational pedigree, financial status. The world pretends to reward merit while quietly filtering opportunity through prejudice and perception. And still the lectures continue. Work harder. Think positive. Build character. The advice flows endlessly, yet it rarely confronts the deeper crisis: the fragmentation of identity in a world that demands conformity while preaching individuality. Some people speak honestly about this contradiction. Others speak only what is convenient, what protects their position, what keeps them safely within the accepted narrative. In such a landscape, alienation becomes a permanent companion. A person may live within a society for decades and still feel like a visitor waiting for permission to belong. The manifesto offers no comforting promise of resolution. It simply exposes the machinery: a world that celebrates opportunity while manufacturing exclusion, a generation trained for stability that never existed, and a culture that teaches people to endure contradictions rather than dismantle them. Condemn the statement if you wish. It changes little. History rarely absolves the comfortable. It remembers the alienated who finally realized that the future and the past were not fighting each other, both had already abandoned them.
J'aime les gens, mais je ne peux pas prendre soin de moi si je suis censé vous aider tout le temps.
What is truth? What are facts? And how can I ensure that your opinion is right and will help me?
Manifesto, Alienation, Identity Conflict, and the Machinery of Learned Helplessness, Part 2. Condemn the accusation if it disturbs the comfortable. Condemn the bitterness if it refuses to bow before the rituals of optimism that decorate modern despair. History may absolve revolutions, but the present generation must first survive the quieter catastrophe unfolding within the human mind. The struggle today is no longer simply between political systems. It is a struggle between awareness and the illusions carefully constructed to keep individuals obedient. Society manufactures expectations with ruthless efficiency. People are told how to behave, what to pursue, what success should look like, and how dignity must be earned. These expectations rarely appear as commands. They arrive disguised as cultural norms, motivational slogans, and social pressure. Yet their influence penetrates the body, mind, and spirit until the individual begins to measure their worth according to standards they never consciously chose. This is where alienation deepens. The modern person lives surrounded by voices, political commentary, social media performance, institutional advice, peer judgment. Each voice competes to define reality. Each voice demands loyalty. The individual, overwhelmed by contradiction, slowly loses the ability to distinguish personal conviction from inherited narrative. Peer pressure and mob mentality perform their silent work. Communities reward conformity while punishing deviation. The fear of exclusion becomes a powerful instrument of control. People reshape their personalities to match the expectations of their environment, sometimes without realizing it. They adopt the language, attitudes, and moral positions that guarantee social survival. Authentic identity becomes negotiable. Meanwhile, the pursuit of social status intensifies the conflict. A culture driven by comparison encourages individuals to measure themselves against impossible standards. Success is displayed constantly through curated images of prosperity and influence. Failure, on the other hand, remains invisible. The result is a psychological economy built on insecurity. Within this system, greed quietly flourishes. The appetite for recognition and validation becomes insatiable. Scarcity is manufactured not only in material resources but in attention and approval. The attention economy thrives on this condition, converting human insecurity into endless consumption of information, trends, and distractions. Empathy erodes as individuals compete for visibility rather than understanding. Substance abuse, ideological extremism, and reckless ambition often emerge as attempts to escape the resulting confusion. These behaviors are rarely random. They are symptoms of an environment that rewards spectacle and punishes reflection. People intoxicate themselves with chemicals, ideology, or social validation in order to dull the discomfort of living inside contradictions they cannot resolve. This is the breeding ground of learned helplessness. When individuals repeatedly confront forces they cannot control, economic instability, cultural prejudice, institutional indifference, they eventually begin to doubt their own agency. The mind adapts by lowering expectations. Dreams shrink. Resistance feels futile. Yet within this bleak landscape another possibility flickers. Conscious awareness can disrupt the cycle. When individuals recognize the mechanisms shaping their perceptions, excessive individualism, social pressure, groupthink, they begin to reclaim fragments of their authentic identity. The process is uncomfortable. It requires confronting illusions that once provided comfort. The manifesto does not pretend that awareness will immediately dismantle the structures responsible for alienation. Systems built on conformity rarely surrender easily. But awareness fractures the illusion that helplessness is inevitable. It reminds individuals that identity does not have to be surrendered to the loudest narrative in the room. History may absolve revolutions fought with weapons and ideology. The revolution unfolding now is quieter and far more unsettling. It is the struggle of individuals attempting to reclaim clarity in a world that profits from their confusion.
J'aime les gens, mais je ne peux pas prendre soin de moi si je suis censée vous aider tout le temps.
What is truth? What are facts? And how can I ensure that your opinion is right and will help me?
Manifesto, Alienation, Identity Conflict, and the Machinery of Learned Helplessness, Part 3. Condemn the voice if it speaks too bluntly. Condemn the language if it refuses to dress despair in academic politeness. It will not matter. History has always listened more carefully to the wounded than to the well-behaved. Revolutions are rarely elegant. They emerge from the friction between expectation and betrayal, between what human beings are capable of and what the systems around them quietly allow. We live in a strange moment of human evolution. Our brains, remarkable instruments shaped by millions of years of adaptation, are capable of reasoning, planning, and learning in ways no previous generation could fully imagine. Neuroeconomics teaches us something painfully simple: the brain constantly calculates value. It weighs rewards, punishments, risks, and social approval. Every decision is influenced by dopamine signals, fear responses, and predictions about future gain or loss. Yet the environment surrounding the modern mind has become distorted. The reward systems that once helped humans survive in small communities are now manipulated by enormous economic structures. Attention, status, and consumption have become the new currencies. The brain's reward circuitry, its dopamine pathways, are constantly triggered by signals promising recognition, success, or belonging. These signals rarely deliver what they promise. They merely keep individuals chasing the next perceived reward. This produces alienation. People are trained to pursue signals of value that have little to do with genuine well-being. They compare themselves endlessly to others, measuring their worth through wealth, popularity, and influence. Neuroeconomic theory calls this social reward calibration, the brain adjusting its expectations according to what others appear to possess. The outcome is predictable: dissatisfaction becomes the default emotional state. Identity begins to fracture under this pressure. The individual receives contradictory signals about who they should be. Culture demands conformity. Markets demand competition. Communities demand loyalty. Social media demands performance. The brain, overwhelmed by these conflicting incentives, attempts to optimize its decisions for survival within each environment. The result is not clarity but fragmentation. A person becomes several versions of themselves depending on context. The worker obeys hierarchy. The consumer pursues status. The citizen pretends to care about collective values. The individual, somewhere beneath all these roles, becomes increasingly difficult to locate. Neuroeconomics describes this phenomenon through bounded rationality. Human beings do not make perfect decisions, they rely on shortcuts, heuristics shaped by past experience and social signals. When those signals are manipulated by powerful institutions, the shortcuts lead people toward behaviors that reinforce the system itself. Learned helplessness begins quietly. When individuals repeatedly experience environments where effort does not reliably produce reward, the brain adapts. It reduces motivation. It lowers expectations. The neural circuitry responsible for optimism weakens while fear networks become dominant. People stop attempting to change conditions that appear unchangeable. This is not laziness. It is neurological adaptation. And yet the tragedy deepens when society misinterprets this adaptation as personal failure. Individuals are told they lack discipline, ambition, or resilience. They are lectured about responsibility by systems that simultaneously manipulate the incentives guiding their behavior. Still, beneath the cynicism lies a dangerous truth: human cognitive potential remains extraordinary. Our capacity for decision-making, problem-solving, and learning has not disappeared. The same brain that can be conditioned into passive obedience can also develop awareness of the mechanisms shaping its behavior. Critical thinking is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is a neurological intervention. It rewires the reward system to value understanding rather than mere approval. But fear interrupts this process. Fear of rejection. Fear of social isolation. Fear of losing whatever fragile stability one has managed to secure. These fears silence curiosity. They convince people that exploring their full cognitive potential is risky, even dangerous. The safest strategy becomes compliance with established expectations, even when those expectations contradict personal truth. The manifesto does not promise redemption. It simply exposes the machinery. Alienation persists because the brain's reward system is constantly manipulated by structures that profit from confusion. Identity conflict grows when individuals attempt to satisfy incompatible incentives. Learned helplessness spreads when repeated disappointments teach the nervous system that resistance is futile. History may absolve revolutions fought with rifles and ideology. The revolution unfolding now is more intimate and unsettling. It takes place inside the neural circuits of the human brain, where the battle between awareness and conditioning continues quietly every day.
J'aime les gens, mais je ne peux pas prendre soin de moi si je suis censé vous aider tout le temps.
What is truth? What are facts? And how can I ensure that your opinion is right and will help me?
Manifesto, Alienation, Identity Conflict, and the Machinery of Learned Helplessness, Part 4. Condemn the voice if it sounds bitter. Condemn the tone if it refuses to polish despair into polite optimism. History has always tolerated suffering as long as it remains quiet. Revolutions begin the moment people realize that silence itself has been engineered. The modern human brain lives inside a market of attention. Every signal, every notification, headline, trending outrage, competes for the same limited resource: focus. Focus is not neutral. It is a form of currency. Whoever captures it controls perception, and whoever controls perception shapes behavior. This is where alienation begins to deepen. The human brain evolved to evaluate reward and threat. It constantly predicts outcomes: gain, loss, approval, rejection. But the digital environment floods the brain with signals designed to hijack those predictions. Each piece of viral content activates small bursts of chemical reward. The brain learns quickly. It begins to crave the next signal, the next reaction, the next confirmation that it still belongs to the tribe. Belonging is powerful. The brain fears social exclusion more than many physical threats. This fear quietly shapes decisions. When individuals sense that their opinions might conflict with the dominant narrative and their environment, the brain adjusts. It edits thoughts before they become words. It adopts positions that maximize social reward and minimize punishment. This is how groupthink grows. Mob mentality is not simply a social phenomenon, it is a neurological adaptation. The brain's reward system reinforces conformity when conformity produces approval. It punishes deviation with anxiety, shame, and fear. Digital platforms amplify this mechanism. Algorithms prioritize content that provokes reaction, because reaction keeps attention circulating. Attention becomes profit. Outrage becomes fuel. Confusion becomes strategy. The result is a population increasingly detached from its own internal compass. People repeat ideas not because they have examined them, but because those ideas carry social reward. A statement gains value through likes, shares, and digital applause rather than through evidence or reflection. Identity fractures under this pressure. The individual begins to perform rather than exist. One identity appears online. Another appears at work. A third appears within family or cultural settings. The brain constantly recalculates which version of the self will receive the greatest approval in each environment. But constant recalculation has consequences. When individuals repeatedly experience environments where authentic expression leads to punishment or exclusion, motivation gradually declines. The brain reduces effort in situations that appear uncontrollable. This pattern produces learned helplessness. People stop believing that thoughtful disagreement or critical reflection can change anything. Instead, they retreat into passivity. They scroll. They react. They mimic. Critical thinking, self-awareness, and media literacy become rare precisely because the environment discourages them. To question the dominant signal requires resisting the brain's natural desire for reward and belonging. It requires tolerating discomfort, while others chase easier approval. Yet this resistance may be the only path toward clarity. The human mind still possesses the capacity to analyze, reflect, and learn. It can recognize when its reward system is being manipulated. It can slow the impulse to react and replace it with deliberate thought. But doing so requires effort in a culture built around instant reaction. The manifesto offers no comforting illusions. Alienation persists because attention has become a commodity. Identity conflict intensifies because social reward depends on conformity. Learned helplessness spreads when individuals believe their awareness makes no difference. History may absolve those who once fought revolutions with rifles and ideology. The revolution unfolding now is quieter and far more unsettling. It begins when individuals reclaim their own attention and refuse to let it be traded like currency in the marketplace of distraction.
J'aime les gens, mais je ne peux pas prendre soin de moi si je suis censé vous aider tout le temps.
What is truth? What are facts? And how can I ensure that your opinion is right and will help me?
Manifesto, Alienation, Identity Conflict, and the Machinery of Learned Helplessness, Part 5. Condemn the voice if it refuses to repeat the polite language of public debate. Condemn the accusation that modern societies prefer convenient myths over uncomfortable history. It will not matter. The fractures that define our time did not appear suddenly. They are the result of long historical currents that continue to shape human identity, belonging, and memory. Communities are built through shared symbols, stories, and traditions. These elements create collective identity, what people believe about themselves, their past, and their place in the world. When those symbols are disrupted, entire populations experience disorientation. Cultural continuity breaks. The next generation inherits fragments rather than foundations. This fragmentation explains much of the alienation visible across the modern world. Migration, exile, and displacement are not only economic events, they are cultural ruptures. Individuals who move across borders carry their memories, languages, and social norms with them. Yet the host society often views them through simplified categories: immigrant, refugee, outsider. These labels flatten complex histories into a single identity marker. Once labeled, the individual must navigate two competing systems of meaning. On one side stands the culture of origin, its traditions, expectations, and moral codes. On the other stands the dominant culture of the host society, its institutions, laws, and narratives of national identity. The individual is expected to integrate smoothly into the latter while maintaining loyalty to the former. The result is identity conflict. People learn to switch between roles depending on context. At home, they may preserve inherited customs and languages. In public, they adapt to the behavioral norms of the surrounding society. This constant negotiation creates psychological tension. Belonging becomes conditional. The political environment intensifies the tension. In many societies, immigration becomes a symbol of national anxiety. Public debate frames newcomers as potential threats, economic burdens, cultural disruptions, security risks. Policies emerge to regulate entry, behavior, and participation. These regulations may appear neutral on the surface, but they often reflect deeper fears about social cohesion and cultural change. Such fears are not entirely irrational. Sudden demographic shifts can challenge institutions and social systems. But the narrative rarely examines the historical forces that produced migration in the first place. Many underdeveloped regions did not arrive at their current condition through isolated failure. Their political structures, economic systems, and educational institutions were shaped by centuries of external domination. Colonial extraction dismantled local governance structures, redirected resources, and rewrote cultural hierarchies. Even after formal independence, the legacy of those transformations remained embedded in political institutions and economic networks. The psychological effects are profound. Communities subjected to long-term exploitation often internalize narratives of inferiority. Cultural knowledge systems decline. Historical memory weakens. Younger generations inherit environments where political instability and economic dependency appear normal. Over time, a form of learned helplessness develops, a collective expectation that structural conditions cannot be changed. This mentality travels with migrants. When individuals from such environments arrive in new societies, they bring not only hope but also inherited wounds. Trauma, disrupted education systems, and weakened institutional trust shape their behavior. Host societies frequently interpret these behaviors through moral judgment rather than historical understanding. Alienation grows on both sides. The immigrant struggles to reconcile competing identities while facing suspicion from the surrounding community. The host population perceives cultural difference as resistance to assimilation. Each group interprets the other through incomplete narratives. Meanwhile, the global system continues its quiet cycle of extraction. Valuable resources leave underdeveloped regions through complex trade networks and corporate agreements. Local populations witness wealth leaving their territories while public infrastructure deteriorates. The resulting frustration often manifests as political instability, which in turn reinforces the narrative of backwardness used to justify continued intervention. Thus the cycle continues: exploitation, displacement, suspicion, and fragmentation. The manifesto does not attempt to resolve this contradiction with comforting rhetoric. It simply exposes the pattern. Alienation grows where cultural continuity is disrupted. Identity conflict intensifies where belonging becomes conditional. Learned helplessness flourishes where historical exploitation is ignored. History may absolve revolutions fought with weapons and ideology. But the deeper struggle remains unfinished, the attempt to rebuild dignity and clarity in societies still living inside the long shadow of their past.